Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for your coming. I think it's quite still cold weather outside, and Friday afternoon, many people are busy, but we welcome and thank you again for your participation. Our 14th IFANS talks. As you know already well, my Institute for Foreign Affairs and National Security, called IFANS, at the Korean National Diplomatic Academy, has been arranged the IFANS talks since 2013, just to make a purpose to increase public awareness and understanding on foreign policies and international issues among the general public, including academicians, students, journalists, and our diplomat in Seoul. In that context, I'm happy to let you know the IFANS talks today will offer you great opportunity to enhance our knowledge and understanding on global issues, particularly on sustainable development goals, new development goals of the United Nations for development cooperation among many countries in the world, and refugee issues, and humanitarian and human rights issues. In that sense, we are very happy to invite the very special and distinguished speakers today, the representatives of UN agencies, UNESCAP, UNHCR, and other well-known international humanitarian non-government organization, ICRC, and special guest of Korea's first ambassador for North Korean human rights, Foreign Ministry. So I'd like to introduce briefly the first speaker is Mr. Kilaparti Ramakrishna. He's a currently director UNESCAP, East and Northeast Asian Office. And second speaker will be Mr. Navid Hussain from UNHCR. He is a representative of UNHCR, the refugee agency, as a representation in Seoul. And third speaker will be Mr. Gianni Volpin. He is a representative of the ICRC, Red Cross officer in the Korea. And last speaker will be Professor Lee Jung-hoon from Yonsei University. He is our first ambassador for North Korean human rights issues. He was appointed by the president in accordance with the new North Korean Human Rights Act was legislated in National Assembly the last March. And the topics of four speakers, as you read in our brief introductions, the first speaker by Mr. Ramakrishna will be on the World 2030 SDG goals, where we want to be. And second topics by Mr. Hussain will be conflict and refugee issues. And third topics will be presented by Mr. Volpin, is about evolution of contemporary armed conflicts and humanitarian consequences. The last one, the fourth speaker by the Professor Lee Jung-hoon will discuss on the international responses to the North Korean human rights violations. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce and invite Mr. Ramakrishna, speaker on the issues of SDG, and followed by the next speakers one by one. Welcome.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I want to thank IFANS and Mr. Shin Dong-ik for the opportunity to be here. And Looking at all of you, one of the things that I miss in Korea, but one that is filled very nicely by KNDA and IFANS, is the opportunity to be here and to be exposed to and participate in a number of issues of critical importance to the world. And this is a wonderful opportunity to come back and do that. And the second reason that I'm happy to be here is to see all of you. Before I joined the United Nations, I was part of a faculty in the United States, and so every time I come to university or be with students, it makes me feel very good. The talk that we have, that I'm going to give to you today, is about the world in 2030 and beyond, and I'm sure you're all familiar with the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development adopted last year in the United Nations. What I thought I would do is to divide my talk into three sections. The first part would deal very briefly with where we are today, and the second part with the problems that we have, and the third part with solutions. So I will try to go very rapidly through each and every one of them that we have, and then, depending on the time, we can have discussions on this. The very first point I want to draw your attention to is the levels of poverty in the world. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Millennium Development Goals, which were adopted after the Millennium Declaration in the year 2000. And those goals have helped reduce poverty, or cut poverty of people living below the poverty line by about half. So by the end of 2015, we have reduced people below the poverty line by 50%. And in terms of numbers, it is about 850 million people who are still below the poverty line. So the goal that the Secretary General and the United Nations had set for itself up to 2030 is to keep that. If you look at the bottom line, okay. If you look at the second part, the bottom line, it requires that the growth, an aggressive growth supported by pro-poor policies, then you have the ability to reduce the people below the poverty line, and so the number would still be about 250 million people. That is a large number, but the number can be explained by the fact that we're talking about people that live in failed states, that live in sub-Saharan Africa or conflict zones. But even to get that to 250 million, in other words, get 600 million people out of the poverty line, we have to have pro-growth policies. We have to have pro-poor policies. And given the rate at which the economy is growing, it is unclear whether we will be able to make that kind of progress in the next 15 years. So there is a huge challenge there. We have a lot of trade agreements that are being talked about, but then the general reaction in the public level seem to be not so much in favor of these global trade agreements. But if I want to continue with the progress rates, what you see on the top side of the slide is the global number of deaths of children under 5, that those are in millions. So when we talk about 1990, it is about 12.7 million, but by 2015, it is reduced to 6 million. And the trends are in the very encouraging direction. And the next slide, the next part of it is about the drinking water, availability of drinking water to masses. The 4.2 billion does not mean that about 3.8 billion are out of the drinking water. They have other kinds of water supply, but not the kind of piped drinking water facilities. So the total number of people with access to drinking water is quite high. That is also a major progress to what we are doing. And lastly, the school enrollments are increasing tremendously, and so we have a lot of people getting education, and of course the value of education, I will talk about it just in a bit. The unfinished business. So when we think about economic growth, when we think about all the progress that is being made, the question that we have to ask ourselves is, has that economic growth been shared by all people if not equally, at least in some manner equitably? And the answer is not very good. If you look at this slide, this looks a bit complicated, but it's very easy to follow if you go each one of them. This is about the Gini coefficients. Now, the key thing to keep in mind is the closer to zero you are, the better. The higher it is, it's bad. So when you look at these countries, they're all trending upwards. So people may be getting wealthier, but a lot of the people are worse off in those countries. And then that is causing a great deal of friction, whether we talk about what happened in Brexit or elections in various other countries. In contrast, if you look at some of the developing countries, it's sort of better, marginally better than the industrialized countries. The question, of course, is we cannot think about reducing the Gini coefficient to the detriment of progress and growth in the country at large. For example, take Brazil. When you started and where we are today, it is better from the Gini point of view, but from the economy point of view, it is pretty bad, because the economy is not doing as well. And then there are a number of other examples of other countries as well. And if you see this is about gender inequality. When we talk about pro-poor policies, or when we talk about benefits of growth reflecting the world at large, I thought it's very important that we talk about the position of women in the society and their ability to do the things that need to be done in terms of making progress and contributing to the economy. Flat lines in a graph are generally considered good, but in this case, it is not, because we need to be able to show more progress and growth on those matters. The key point I wanted to make in this entire lecture deal with, one, with inequalities, and second, with climate change. These are, of course, principal goals in the Sustainable Development Goals in the Agenda 2030. And this is what you see. If you take from 1900 to 2000, you see that spike going into that red line, that you see there. But if you see this part, this is the scary part. When you come here, you see the red line going dramatically upwards to a temperature increase of up to about 4 degrees Celsius. And this RCP that you talk about is, if business as usual is continued, the RCP stands for Representative Concentration Pathways, a term used in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. That's not good at all. And what you see in the next slide is really a very dramatic, although a cartoonish, impressions of what happens if climate warming takes place. Now, if you bear with me, just look at it. We're talking about already 1 degree centigrade. I know if this works or not, but with 1 degree Celsius increase, we're talking about species extinction, or rare species extinction, or coral reefs being destroyed, or island nations underwater. If you take 2 degrees, we're talking about polar bears going extinct, and water supply being affected, and polar caps melting. And if you take suddenly the extreme case of 4 degrees Celsius or the 5 degrees Celsius, we're talking about millions of refugees. Whether you call them climate refugees or whatever, that is going to have a profound impact on a lot of things that we want to do. About a third of the Bangladesh going underwater, permafrost melting in the Arctic, and gases being released, and most of the world being uninhabitable. So the temperature increase and the impacts of that on the way we lead our lives is tremendous. So first part that you want to keep in mind is getting the inequality issue under control, and the second part is about the climate change. Now, what are the solutions? And when you talk about solutions, it's, I think, instructive to look at the various types of industrial revolutions that we have witnessed. About 3 of them we have already gone through, and the 4th, some say it is here or it's coming. But the point I wanted to make in this is technologies are hugely helpful in solving a lot of our problems. They have helped us move from mechanical production of railroads and steam power first to the mass production, the assembly lines, the introduction of the electric power and etc. From there, we moved to automated production. I mean, even if you take just from one to the other, in the first case, there was no automobile. In the first industrial, though that helped bring a lot of the countries and a lot of the people in those countries out of poverty and give them material comforts, but they were basically riding horses. And so the biggest problem at the time they could think of was about horse manure, everywhere on the streets, and the health effects caused by that. But by the time we came to automobiles, while that is a huge improvement, we have begun noticing the air pollution and the various health impacts of that. So while technology is going to be very helpful to us, we have to be mindful of the fact that that technology can also be an issue. In addition to the technology, this is something you want to think about, because things are changing in the world. The way it mattered a great deal not long ago where you were born and who you were born to, in terms of what happens to you in life. That has changed dramatically. Now, Thomas Friedman many years ago wrote about the world is flat, and now we're talking about issues like this. The crowdfunding, it's not anymore a Rockefeller or a Ford or somebody making things happen. A good idea, when it is advertised through the web, how it has come to. I mean, the Operation Chromite, a movie that had apparently a number of hundreds of investors from Korea making it happen. And of course, the vehicle, the Elio vehicle that you see in the bottom right-hand corner, had raised about $100 million. It's a three-wheel car with about 60,000 people asking for reservations. Elon Musk and the Tesla car, when he wanted $1,000 deposit, 300,000 people have suddenly put in $1,000 each, and there is that much money for Elon Musk to work with. And likewise, if you look at this slide, the sharing economy, and that's the cover page of The Economist, what this tells you is that it's not anymore about ownership. When you think about Airbnb or the Uber, both of them are about in excess of about $50 billion companies. There is no massive infrastructure building them. This is all the houses that exist are being used as part of the Airbnb. All the cars that are being on the road, are used by Uber. And now, we have Didi, the ride-sharing company in China, is already valued. It's only in one country, but it is already valued at some $26 billion. So these things are, very prominent developments. And so, in other words, the point I'm trying to make is you really need to think differently about solving the problems that we have today. And whether it is the Internet of Things or, the implications of that we need to understand before we move forward. Now, these are the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 of them, and there are about 169 targets and number of indicators. So we have these. This is a very complex agenda. The difference between the Sustainable Development Goals and the Millennium Development Goals is this. Millennium Declaration came out in 2000, and the UN Secretariat had taken about 2 to 3 years to extract the goals from the Millennium Development Goals. But the Sustainable Development Goals was not just a secretariat exercise. It was not just a member country exercise. It was an exercise by a lot of the people like you. The United Nations, for the first time, carried out a global campaign on what kind of world you want to live in. And people wrote their dream world, a world where the equality, peace, and partnership, all of them are important, and this is taken from that. The key thing here again is every goal is connected with the other goal. You cannot imagine implementing one to the exclusion of others. And in fact, if you see the next slide, it tells you how very closely interconnected they are. And this is probably not very helpful to you in terms of understanding it, but if you take each goal separately and see the interconnections with other goals, it becomes important. And why is that important for us? Okay, let us take goal 7, for example. It talks about improving energy access so that everyone has light to work with or gas to cook with and heat the house and so on and so forth. Well, you can do that by using coal. And if you do that, well, the greenhouse gases are going to increase and cause climate change. And the gases also increase acidification of the oceans. Likewise, the air pollution is going to affect the health and well-being of the people. So we need to be mindful. The fact that we want to increase energy access is not reason enough to think about, not think about the other impacts. Another example, I'm sure some time ago, you were all familiar with the ozone hole. And the culprit there was chlorofluorocarbons. They came up with a substitute, chlorofluorocarbon, that is not going to damage the ozone hole. But it turned out that substitute has an enormous amount of global warming potential and is causing climate change. So you cannot, in solving one problem, create other problems. And fortunately, it is not always that way because there are solutions. The point of this is that it's not just about either burning coal or going without electricity or without heating or cooking. We have seen the photovoltaics, the price coming down from 77 to 2015, from what was $76 to less than 30 cents per dollar. And this technology is being used by a number of countries moving forward very rapidly and aggressively on a range of solutions. Second thing, we shouldn't think about solving a problem as creating other problems. Education, for example, is one, it's a complete win-win situation. The more you invest in education, the more goals are met. More education for girls and quality education that leads to gender equality, that leads to decent work, and of course reducing poverty and increasing health and well-being of the people. The other point I want to make here is this idea that we have these goals that need to be met within a time frame in a manner that we have never tried before, that engages people across the board. It's not just the United Nations working with member countries, but with all the major groups and stakeholders, is a very important thing. Millennium Development Goals were goals to be implemented in the developing world, but the Sustainable Development Goals are global, are universal. And so we need to work with all the countries in the world, all the various actors that have an influence in it, the private sector, the religious groups, the women groups, the youth groups particularly. And given the fact that many of you here are from universities or colleges, I want to mention how Secretary General Ban made a very powerful point when he said that let's not call youth as leaders of tomorrow anymore, because they are leaders today by what they are doing in various countries. And he also said that this is the first generation that can end poverty. And this is the last generation that can deal with climate change effectively. So what he's trying to talk about is we have been trying to deal with poverty and inequality for a very long period of time. But in this generation, if we adopt the right kinds of policies, that we would be able to address that issue. And then he also said, when he talks about the last generation in terms of dealing with climate change, what he's really talking about is the consequences of lack of action are too profound to contemplate. We cannot think about a circumstance where species go extinct, ecosystems suffer, sea levels rise, and land gets affected, and everything else that we depend on gets affected. So what do we see in terms of 2030 and beyond? The only way we can make progress is if we were to keep it an inclusive society, where the benefits are not just with few, but are shared across. I want to end with two quotes. one quote by Deputy Secretary General Jan Eliasson. He said, "There is no peace without development. There is no development without peace. And there is no lasting peace or sustainable development without respect of human rights and the rule of law." And given the fact that the speakers who are going to come after me are going to speak about those things, I thought that's very important that we make that connection to these things. Secretary General, to conclude, said, as a clarion call to all of us, he said, "Be a global citizen. Act with passion and compassion. Help us make this world safer and more sustainable today and for the generations that follow us. That is our moral responsibility." So leaving no one behind and working hard to ensure that the climate stability is ensured and the questions of inequality that plague the society are taken care of are just some of the key points that we need to keep in mind to be able to make rapid progress. Thank you very much for your attention.